Hi everybody, in this coding exercise, we're going to be creating what's known as the Devowelizer, a very simple application where you type in some text, you click a button that says Devowelize, and what happens is any vowels in the text you entered are automatically removed. And so let's take a look at an example of this. So here I have my example. Let me zoom in a bit so you can see things more clearly. I'm going to type in the words, hello world, how is everyone today? Okay, a very simple phrase, some capitalized words, some lowercase words, just some text. And I'm going to go and hit the Devowelize button. And once I click that, notice what you're going to see in the area where I just enter some text. Hit Devowelize, and notice now all you're left with are just the consonants. All the vowels have been completely stripped away. So in this video, we're going to take a look at how to build exactly this, both the UI and the capabilities to take some text and remove all the vowels from it. It's going to be a lot of fun. So let's get started. So what I have right now is essentially my code editor, VS Code, tiled on one side of the screen, and then the same exact page that is currently being edited displayed on the right hand side in my browser. And right now, as you can see, it's a blank screen. The document is also very blank. So let's go ahead and get started by putting in the bare bones content needed to specify an HTML page. There's several ways you can do this. In VS Code, you have this handy shortcut where if you are in an HTML file, you can hit the exclamation character, hit enter, and the boilerplate content for what would be an HTML page is specified for you. So let me go and zoom in a bit so you can see all this more clearly. So the first thing I'm going to do is change the document value to be just the Devowelizer. Alright, so if you refresh this page, you'll now see the Devowelizer is now shown on the screen as well. So at least we now have some progress where what I have on my screen and the browser represents what's currently in the code in my code editor. Alright, so now let's go ahead and just start building the basic UI for a page, the title, the text area, and the button itself. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to body, type in my heading 1 tag, the Devowelizer. And then the next item is going to be our text area, the one that's going to be responsible for actually all the text that we enter living, and also the results of the devowelizing going in as well. The text area, give it an ID value. I'm going to call it the text input. And then let's go ahead and give it a placeholder so that way we can give some basic idea of like what's going to go inside here. Say add paste text, and let me go ahead and close our text area, which auto completes to what you see right there. Let me zoom out a bit so you can see all of that in one screen. All right, and the next and last item in terms of our HTML elements will be the button that we click on to remove all the vowels. I'm going to call it button ID equals, not feeling very creative, so I'll call it the button, and then call it Devowelize. All right. So now that we've added these three HTML elements, the heading tag, the text area, and the button, let's refresh our page to see what we see on screen. Okay, I'm going to zoom in quite a bit here to make everything more legible. All right, you can see the text Devowelizer, you can see our text area, and you can see our button. And of course, clicking the button doesn't do anything. We just see basic HTML capabilities, nothing too exciting here. And so the first thing we want to do is actually give this page a certain look and feel that makes it look like something that we kind of care about, not just something we just threw up there because we just want to do something. And this is where a lot of CSS will come in. And so I'm going to go through each of the various properties that we're going to be adding to make this all work. It's going to be a lot of fun, so go ahead and follow along. So we're going to add my style tags in my head region. And the first thing I'm going to do is just go ahead and center all of the elements vertically, and actually not vertically, but at least in the center on the screen, and have all these three elements stack on top of each other. And there are several ways of doing this. The easiest way is by setting my display of my body element to grid, and then select place items, and then select center. Yep, that's it, place item center. If I refresh this page, notice what you see here. You now see our heading, the text area, and the button all perfectly stacked on top of each other, centered horizontally as well. And if it so happens that my entire page was much larger, they'd be centered in other ways, vertically also. Let me go ahead and, since I'm at the body element, give it a padding of 40 pixels and give it a nice background color. We kind of have this whole purplish theme going for it. Let's go ahead and stick with that. So it's going to be a very light purple color. FF1, E9FF. No, I did not actually memorize it. I just happen to have my notes right below where things like color values, which I might remember, are specified for me. All right, let me refresh the page. And now you can see that we have a light purple background and then our content perfectly stacked on top of each other. Okay, great. And so now let's go ahead and format our heading content. So for the heading content, it's going to be font family is sans serif. Font size is 56 pixels. And let's just see how that looks right now. The Devowelizer, yep, nice and big, and everything else looks good. We also have an icon of like the emoji with like the purple colored one that looks like has horns. We're going to go ahead and add that to our heading. And the way I'm going to do that is by specifying it as a background image. And so I'm going to do background image, and it's going to be URL. And this is the URL of the image on the Crib.com site itself. So crib.com/icon/1f608.svg. And if I refresh this page right now, yep, you'll see that icon shows up. Not exactly the way we want it. It's being duplicated quite a bit. So we'll go ahead and remove the duplication. So background repeat. This is the property in CSS that determines whether something repeats or not, in at least the background image. I'm going to say no repeat. And let's go ahead and just position everything to account for this. So no repeat, padding left. I'm going to shift the entire text over by 70 pixels. And the reason is that I'm going to have the background be filling up that spot where the empty space is going to be. So to an user, it'll look exactly as if we have one element where you have an image and the text all following along from it. So that's pretty neat. So left, center, and then I think, yeah, background size is the last item that we want to specify. And we look at 50 pixels. All right, let's refresh this page. And now you can see the Devowelizer, you can see the icon positioned left of it, and this is pretty cool. You know, our example is already starting to come alive. It looks a little bit more professional than before. All right, now let's go ahead and format the two remaining elements, the button and our text area. So our text area has an ID value of text input, so we'll go and just target that directly in our CSS. And let me specify some basic properties here. Margin top is going to be 20 pixels. Margin bottom will be 20 pixels. Right now, as you can see, it's currently stacked directly on top of our Devowelize button, and there's some space between it, but we'll go and give more space as well. Give it a width of 500 pixels, height of 200 pixels, and then let's give it a border. You know, it's like things like try to do padding first or border. Let's do border. Let's do a 5 pixels solid black. You know, this really means it's serious. This, you know, if you take a look at it right now, you're going to be like, this text area, it means business. All right, Devowelizer, add paste text. Devowelize the last remaining item. All right, now we're at the button, and as we can tell from our HTML, our button has an ID value of button. Now, given the example right here, I can actually target the element directly as part of my CSS selectors, but in case this example gets more complicated or we do more things, it's just easier to be more specific. So I'm just going to target the button in an ID form as opposed to button as a generic element. Okay, and so for the button, same thing. We can first give it a border, just like before, because it makes it consistent and it looks kind of cool. And then give it a padding of 10 pixels, font size of 24 pixels, so the text Devowelize is much larger. Font weight, bold. Yeah, there's no shying away here. And then let's give it our button a background color. It's a slightly darker purple than our current background is. So CFB7F6. All right, so if I refresh this page now, what do we see? Right, we see our Devowelize button. Right now the button doesn't look like much because we kind of overrode some of the styles. Let's give it a hover value and a cursor. So that way it can be something that looks more like your typical button that you might have used, or at least see how it's used compared to other things on your page. So background color, you know, we're going to go a little bit on the opposite side of the color wheel and do a yellow color for the background, and the cursor is going to be pointer, you know, the finger thing you see when you hover over a link. All right, so now we have everything looks good. Yep, you can see Devowelize when I hover over it. You can change this to a nice yellow color. All right, cool. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit so that we can, you know, see more of the code as we're going to be writing it. All right, so now that we have all of our visuals in place, our HTML document ready, now the fun part, hard part, or somewhere in between, really is the code that is going to make all this work. So let me go ahead and add a script element or script tag. That's where all of our code is going to live. The first thing I'm going to do is reference the two elements that we really need in our JavaScript itself, and that would be the text area and the button itself. So const text input equals document.query selector, and give it the ID value of text input that we had earlier. Similarly, const the button equals document.query selector, and it's going to be the button. Okay, so now we have a reference in our JavaScript to our text input and button elements. And so what we want to do is when the button is clicked, we want to run some code that's going to change and remove all the consonants from whatever text we have entered. So I'm going to do the button, add event listener, and it's going to be click. So whenever click happens, call the function devowelize, and go ahead and set false because don't really care about tunneling or bubbling right now. And so now function devowelize. Here's where all of our code is going to live. That's going to do all the fun things when the developers button is clicked. So refresh the page, everything looks good. Now, I'm going to do alert, test. Now, I've always done console.log, but just for kicks, I realized why don't I use alert? Especially in this case. So hit devowelize, and look at that. It is actually not clicking properly. And I know the reason why. Notice that when I did query selector, I forgot the pound key. And so now if we were to click devowelize, you'll now see this page says test, the alert kicks in. And it's always good to take a step after writing some code to check to see everything works appropriately, because you can imagine if I went much further down in writing more code that I may not know which of the lines of code I added most recently would have caused my entire application to no longer work. And so it's good to frequently test. I mean, it's actually good to not make silly mistakes like I did, but they're just a part of how coding typically works. So therefore, anticipate mistakes, check frequently to see how your code is doing, so that way you can avoid having to look at a whole lot of code to see what's currently going on. All right, for devowelize. Now, I'm going to show you two approaches for how to remove vowels from some text that has been provided. One approach is by looking at each character in the text that is entered and removing the vowels from it. That's a loop-based approach. The other approach uses regex, regular expressions, to match strings and remove characters from it. That's a little bit more tricky, so I'm going to show you both approaches. One that is less tricky, more logical, more straightforward and easy to understand, and other one that is easy if you don't understand regular expressions, but I can probably count on one hand the people who are really good at regular expressions, so we'll save that for the next part of what we're going to be looking at. So for the first one, we're going to look at the approach where we take a look at all the letters, match them with the vowels A, E, I, O, and U, and if the vowel is matched, go ahead and remove it and ignore the text completely. And so the first thing we're going to do is let original text equals text input dot value. This is going to get a value of whatever we enter into the screen. And let final text equals blank. Now what we're going to have, the converted value, is going to start off as an empty string, essentially. So const vowels equals A, E, I, O, and U. All right, so we have basically a string with all of the vowels currently in it. And now what I'm going to do is create a loop that goes through each of the characters that we have and see the vowels belong as a part of it. For const char of original text dot split, and I'm splitting it between just an empty character so that every letter becomes a part of it. Okay, and so right now what's going to happen is for whatever word we enter, this loop is going to go through, and the variable char, C-H-A-R, will now store a reference to each letter that we're currently dealing with. And so what I'm going to do next is if vowels dot includes, so checking if this vowels, any of these values includes, it's included as part of the characters we see right now. So char dot to lowercase. And notice I'm calling lowercase because I don't really care if it's capitalized or not capitalized. I just want to pick one, and so I'm going to pick to lowercase, and then go from there and see how it's going to go ahead and go, and then remove the values from there. And so if vowels includes, or in this case if it does not include, so I'm going to put an exclamation mark in front of it. I'm going to say final text plus or equals car. So what I'm saying again is that if I have, let's say, the words hello, I'm going to split my word hello into individual characters, which means that original text split is going to be like HELLO, like each individual item. And then for each letter, I'm going to go and check, does the letter I have, is it included within AEIOU? For H, it's not going to be included, so we'll go ahead and add it to our final text. E is going to be included, so it'll fail, and therefore this will not be added. And we'll keep going through until the final result comes in. And so once this loop has completed, we can assume that final text includes all the characters except all the vowels have been removed. And so let's go ahead and do text input dot value equals final text. Okay, that's all the code we wrote. Let's see if this all works out properly. So I'm going to type in the words hello, like we kind of talked about a second ago. I'm going to hit devowelize. And when I do that, you can see HLL is the final response. Hello world, it is rainy outside right now. So it's slightly longer text. Devowelize, you can see that all of the vowels have been removed. So here's the approach that we use to remove things in a more traditional loop-based approach, loop-based matching approach. Now, I did say there's the other approach, which is much simpler into the lines of code you write, but requires a whole lot more conceptual knowledge of how regular expressions work. And that is the approach where we're going to be changing this to not use the loop, but to actually use regular expressions. So I'm going to type in, I'm going to change this to devowelize regex. And then make it a new function. So function devowelize regex. Okay. And so in this case, we're going to say something slightly different. And the way regular expressions work in JavaScript is quite well, actually. They're well integrated throughout multiple areas where text or any kind of value matching needs to happen. One approach with strings is you have the replace method. And the replace method takes a regular expression and it swaps out what, if anything, matches from whatever string you're comparing it to. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go and provide my regular expression. So let test pattern equals, and I'm going to first use these characters. I'm going to explain what these characters are in a second. So this is going to be the slash AEIOU and then slash GI. Okay, and what I'm specifying here really is this. I'm specifying the first slash specifies start our regular expression, and this bracket AEIOU, it creates a class of characters. And the word class is a regular expression terminology in this case, not a JavaScript object case, where we're creating a class of characters that AEIOU, if any of these match, that is perfectly valid, and these brackets kind of specify which of these are going to be matching. And the last thing is the slash, which tells us to end a regular expression. So the first slash is like we're starting a regular expression, second slash tells us we're ending a regular expression, and then the GI specifies two things. One is it sets the entire value to be global, and then the I specifies case insensitivity, which means that it doesn't matter if it's capitalized or not capitalized, just treat it all the same, similar to how we converted all of our text to lowercase when checking to see if there was a vowel in play or not. Okay, so now I can do let original content, or original text actually, equals text input dot value. So this is similar to what we had earlier, where whatever has been entered is now being turned into that, we're storing a reference to that. And now I'm going to write back into text input that value, and it's going to equal original text dot replace. And then what I'm going to specify here is our regular expression, which is test pattern, the variable we saw earlier, and then just an empty string because I don't want to change it to anything beyond that. Okay. And so now let's see if this all works. Let me type in the word hello, hit devowelize. You can see HL is displayed. And then what's a fun phrase to put? The devowelizer is a funny sounding word, right? And I'm going to hit devowelize. I noticed that just like we would have expected, all the vowels have been removed. And the reason I kind of wanted this example is you can see that even though we have line breaks and so on, it all gets maintained in both this approach and the earlier approach we saw earlier using a loop. So this is really our regular expressions based approach. So yeah, look at that. We have an example that looks kind of snazzy and works pretty well, and we're in a good spot. Alright, so I hope you found this example pretty useful and also fun to create. One of the best things about these exercises is that not only is it good to learn some basic JavaScript techniques as part of building a more into an example, it's also good to have fun along the way, and hopefully Devowelizer hit the right mark on both those fronts, where we looked at not just building the UI, building the DOM elements, and then writing all the JavaScript. We also within that looked at two approaches for solving it. One is by what I like to call the more traditional approach, where we go through each character and then see if it matches a particular one, and then add it to our final collection of our final text. And the other approach, which is the more simpler looking, a regular expressions based approach, which does require a certain amount of knowledge of regular expressions to work. So it doesn't matter which approach you like or lean into, they're both fine as long as you had a good time creating all of this. If you have any questions about this example, or if you're into any issues, or just want to talk about web development in general, post in the forums at forum@crypto.com, where I and others would be happy to help you out. If you like this video, tell your friends and enemies all about it. Hit subscribe to be notified of new videos that I'll be making. Follow me at Krupp on Twitter for bite-sized updates on either new content I write or some cool stuff that I see, and probably a lot of pictures of cats and dogs. And lastly, if you enjoy reading content on the web, you might also enjoy reading them in paperback and or Kindle editions. Check out all of the books that I have written. Some of them are animation related, some of them are DOM related, some of them are very specific, others are very high level. So depending on what your skill sets are and what your web development interests are, there's a good chance I have a book for you that'll be just perfect. It also make great gifts. Just keep that in mind. And with that, I will see you all next time.